This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Superstition of Divorce by G. K. Chesterton. Chapter 5. The Story of the Family. The most ancient of human institutions has an authority that may seem as wild as anarchy. Alone among all such institutions, it begins with a spontaneous attraction, and may be said strictly and not sentimentally to be founded on love instead of fear. The attempt to compare it with coercive institutions, complicating later history, has led to infinite illogicality in later times. It is as unique as it is universal. There is nothing in any other social relations in any way parallel to the mutual attraction of the sexes. By missing this simple point, the modern world has fallen into 100 follies. The idea of a general revolt of women against men has been proclaimed with flags and processions, like a revolt of vassals against their lords, of blacks against black drivers, of Poles against Prussians, or Irishmen against Englishmen, for all the world as if we really believed in the fabulous nation of the Amazons. The equally philosophical idea of a general revolt of men against women has been put into a romance by Sir Walter Besant, and into a sociological book by Mr. Belfort Bax. But at the first touch of this truth of an aboriginal attraction, all such comparisons collapse and are seen to be comic. A Prussian does not feel from the first that he can only be happy if he spends his days and nights with a Pole. An Englishman does not think his house empty and cheerless unless it happens to contain an Irishman. A white man does not in his romantic youth dream of the perfect beauty of a black man. A railway magnate seldom writes poems about the personal fascination of a railway porter. All the other revolts against all the other relations are reasonable and even inevitable, because those relations are originally only founded upon force or self-interest. Force can abolish what force can establish. Self-interest can terminate a contract when self-interest has dictated the contract. But the love of a man and a woman is not an institution that can be abolished. That is certain to outlast them all. All the other revolts are real, because there remains a possibility that the things may be destroyed, or at least divided. You can abolish capitalists, but you cannot abolish males. Prussians can go out of Poland, or Negroes be repatriated to Africa, but a man and a woman must remain together in one way or another, and must learn to put up with each other somehow. These are very simple truths. That is why nobody nowadays seems to take any particular notice of them. And the truth that follows next is equally obvious. There is no dispute about the purpose of nature in creating such an attraction. It would be more intelligent to call it the purpose of God, for nature can have no purpose unless God is behind it. To talk of the purpose of nature is to make a vain attempt to avoid being anthropomorphic, merely by being feminist. It is believing in a goddess because you are too skeptical to believe in a god. But this is a controversy which can be kept apart from the question. If we content ourselves with saying that the vital value ultimately found in this attraction is, of course, the renewal of the race itself, the child is an explanation of the father and the mother, and the fact that it is a human child is the explanation of the ancient human ties connecting the father and the mother. The more human, that is, the less bestial is the child, the more lawful and lasting are the ties. So far from any progress in culture or the sciences tending to loosen the bond, any such progress must logically tend to tighten it. The more things there are for the child to learn, the longer he must remain at the natural school for learning them, and the longer his teachers must at least postpone the dissolution of their partnership. The elementary truth is hidden today in vast masses of vicarious, indirect and artificial work, with the fundamental fallacy of which I shall deal in a moment. Here I speak of the primary position of the human group, as it has stood through unthinkable ages of waxing and waning civilizations, often unable to delegate any of its work, always unable to delegate all of it. In this, I repeat, it will always be necessary for the two teachers to remain together in proportion as they have anything to teach. One of the shapeless sea beasts that merely detaches itself from its offspring and floats away could float away to a submarine divorce court or an advanced club founded on free love for fishes. The sea beast might do this precisely because the sea beast's offspring need do nothing, because it has not got to learn the polka or the multiplication table. All these are truisms, but they are also truths, and truths that will return, for the present tangle of semi-official substitutes is not only a stop-gap, but one that is not big enough to stop the gap. If people cannot mind their own business, it cannot possibly be made economical to pay them to mind each other's business, and still less to mind each other's babies. It is simply throwing away a natural force and then paying for an artificial force, as if a man were to water a plant with a hose while holding up an umbrella to protect it from the rain. The whole really rests on a plutocratic illusion of an infinite supply of servants. When we offer any other system as a career for women, we are really proposing that an infinite number of them should become servants of a plutocratic or bureaucratic sort. Ultimately, we are arguing that a woman should not be a mother to her own baby, but a nursemaid to somebody else's baby. But it will not work, even on paper. We cannot all live by taking in each other's washing, especially in the form of pinafores. In the last resort, the only people who either can or will give individual care to each of the individual children are their individual parents. The expression as applied to those dealing with changing crowds of children is a graceful and legitimate flourish of speech. This triangle of truisms of father and child cannot be destroyed. It can only destroy those civilizations which disregard it. Most modern reformers are merely bottomless skeptics and have no basis on which to rebuild, and it is well that such reformers should realize that there is something they cannot reform. You can put down the mighty from their seat, you can turn the world upside down, and there is much to be said for the view that it may then be the right way up. But you cannot create a world in which the baby carries the mother. You cannot create a world in which the mother has not authority over the baby. You can waste your time in trying, by giving votes to babies or proclaiming a republic of infants in arms. You can say, as an educationist said the other day, that small children should criticize, question authority, and suspend their judgment. I do not know why he did not go on to say that they should earn their own living, pay income tax to the state, and die in battle for the fatherland, for the proposal evidently is that children shall have no childhood. But you can, if you find entertainment in such games, organize representative government among little boys and girls, and tell them to take their legal and constitutional responsibilities as seriously as possible. In short, you can be crazy, but you cannot be consistent. You cannot really carry your own principle back to the aboriginal group and really apply it to the mother and the baby. You will not act on your own theory in the simplest and most practical of all possible cases. You are not quite as mad as that. This nucleus of natural authority has always existed in the midst of more artificial authorities. It has always been regarded as something in the literal sense individual, that is, as an absolute that could not really be divided. A baby was not even a baby apart from its mother. It was something else, most probably a corpse. It was always recognized as standing in a peculiar relation to government, simply because it was one of the few things that had not been made by government, and could, to some extent, come into existence without the support of government. Indeed, the case for it is too strong to be stated. The case for it is that there is nothing like it, and we can only find faint parallels to it in these more elaborate and painful powers and institutions that are its inferiors. Thus the only way of conveying it is to compare it to a nation, although compared to it national divisions are as modern and formal as national anthems. Thus I may often use the metaphor of a city, though in its presence a citizen is as recent as a city clerk. It is enough to note here that everybody does know by intuition and admit by implication that a family is a solid fact, having a character and a colour like a nation. The truth can be tested by the most modern and most daily experiences. A man does say, "This is the sort of thing the Browns will like," however tangled and interminable a psychological novel he might compose on the shades of difference between Mr. and Mrs. Brown. A woman does say, "I don't like Jemima seeing so much of the Robinsons," and she does not always, in the scurry of her social or domestic duties, pause to distinguish the optimistic materialism of Mrs. Robinson from the more acid cynicism which tinges the hedonism of Mr. Robinson. There is a colour of the household inside, as conspicuous as the colour of the house outside. That colour is a blend, and if any tint in it predominate, it is generally that preferred by Mr. Robinson. But like all composite colours, it is a separate colour, as separate as green is from blue and yellow. Every marriage is a sort of wild balance, and in every case the compromise is as unique as an eccentricity. Philanthropists walking in the slums often see the compromise in the street and mistake it for a fight. When they interfere, they are thoroughly thumped by both parties, and serve them right for not respecting the very institution that brought them into the world. The first thing to see is that this enormous normality is like a mountain, and one that is capable of being a volcano. Every abnormality that is now opposed to it is like a molehill, and the earnest sociological organizers of it are exceedingly like moles. But the mountain is a volcano in another sense also, as suggested in that tradition of the southern fields fertilized by lava. It has a creative as well as a destructive side, and it only remains, in this part of the analysis, to note the political effect of this extra political institution, and the political ideals of which it has been the champion, and perhaps the only permanent champion. The ideal for which it stands in the state is liberty, for the very simple reason with which this rough analysis started. It is the only one of these institutions that is at once necessary and voluntary. It is the only check on the state that is bound to renew itself as eternally as the state, and more naturally than the state. Every sane man recognizes that unlimited liberty is anarchy, or rather is nonentity. The civic idea of liberty is to give the citizen a province of liberty, a limitation within which a citizen is a king. This is the only way in which truth can ever find refuge from public persecution, and the good man survived the bad government. But the good man by himself is no match for the city. There must be balanced against it another ideal institution, and in that sense an immortal institution. So long as the state is the only ideal institution, the state will call on the citizen to sacrifice himself, and therefore will not have the smallest scruple in sacrificing the citizen. The state consists of coercion, and must always be justified from its own point of view in extending the bounds of coercion, as for instance in the case of conscription. The only thing that can be set up to check or challenge this authority is a voluntary law and a voluntary loyalty. That loyalty is the protection of liberty, in the only sphere where liberty can fully dwell. It is a principle of the Constitution that the king never dies. It is the whole principle of the family that the citizen never dies. There must be a heraldry and heredity of freedom, a tradition of resistance to tyranny. A man must be not only free, but free-born. Indeed, there is something in the family that might loosely be called anarchistic, and more correctly called amateur. As there seems something almost vague about its voluntary origin, so there seems something vague about its voluntary organization. The most vital function it performs, perhaps the most vital function that anything can perform, is that of education. But its type of early education is far too essential to be mistaken for instruction. In 1,000 things it works rather by rule of thumb than by rule of theory. To take a commonplace and even comic example, I doubt if any textbook or code of rules has ever contained any directions about standing a child in a corner. Doubtless, when the modern process is complete and the coercive principle of the state has entirely extinguished the voluntary element of the family, there will be some exact regulation or restriction about this matter. Possibly it will say that the corner must be at an angle of at least 95 degrees. Possibly it will say that the converging line of any ordinary corner tends to make a child squint. In fact, I am certain that if I said casually, at a sufficient number of tea tables, that corners made children squint, it would rapidly become a universally received dogma of popular science. For the modern world will accept no dogmas upon any authority, but it will accept any dogmas on no authority. Say that a thing is so according to the Pope or the Bible, and it will be dismissed as a superstition without examination. But preface your remark merely with "they say," or "don't you know that?" or try and fail to remember the names of some professor mentioned in some newspaper, and the keen rationalism of the modern mind will accept every word you say. This parenthesis is not so irrelevant as it may appear, for it will be well to remember that when a rigid officialism breaks in upon the voluntary compromises of the home, that officialism itself will be only rigid in its action, and will be exceedingly limp in its thought. Intellectually, it will be at least as vague as the amateur arrangements of the home, and the only difference is that the domestic arrangements are in the only real sense practical. That is, they are founded on experiences that have been suffered. The others are what is now generally called scientific. That is, they are founded on experiments that have not yet been made. As a matter of fact, instead of invading the family with the blundering bureaucracy that mismanages the public services, it would be far more philosophical to work the reform the other way round. It would be really quite as reasonable to alter the laws of the nation so as to resemble the laws of the nursery. The punishments would be far less horrible, far more humorous, and far more really calculated to make men feel they had made fools of themselves. It would be a pleasant change if a judge, instead of putting on the black cap, had to put on the dunce's cap, or if we could stand a financier in his own corner. Of course, this opinion is rare and reactionary, whatever that may mean. Modern education is founded on the principle that a parent is more likely to be cruel than anybody else. It passes over the obvious fact that he is less likely to be cruel than anybody else. Anybody may happen to be cruel, but the first chances of cruelty come with a whole colourless and indifferent crowd of total strangers and mechanical mercenaries, whom it is now the custom to call in as infallible agents of improvement. Policemen, doctors, detectives, inspectors, instructors, and so on. They are automatically given arbitrary power because there are here and there such things as a criminal parent, as if there were no such things as criminal doctors or criminal schoolmasters. A mother is not always judicious about her child's diet, so it is given into the control of Dr. Crippen. A father is thought not to teach his sons the purest morality, so they are put under the tutorship of Eugene Aram. These celebrated criminals are no more rare in their respective professions than the cruel parents are in the profession of parenthood. But indeed the case is far stronger than this, and there is no need to rely on the case of such criminals at all. The ordinary weaknesses of human nature will explain all the weaknesses of bureaucracy and business government all over the world. The official need only be an ordinary man to be more indifferent to other people's children than to his own, and even to sacrifice other people's family prosperity to his own. He may be bored, he may be bribed, he may be brutal, for any one of the 1,000 reasons that ever made a man a brute. All this elementary common sense is entirely left out of account in our educational and social systems of today. It is assumed that the hireling will not flee, and that solely because he is a hireling. It is denied that the shepherd will lay down his life for the sheep, or for that matter even that the she-wolf will fight for the cubs. We are to believe that mothers are inhuman, but not that officials are human. There are unnatural parents, but there are no natural passions. At least there are none where the fury of King Lear dared to find them, in the beetle. Such is the latest light on the education of the young, and the same principle that is applied to the child is applied to the husband and wife, Just as it assumes that a child will certainly be loved by anybody except his mother, so it assumes that a man can be happy with anybody except the one woman he has himself chosen for his wife. Thus the coercive spirit of the state prevails over the free promise of the family in the shape of formal officialism. But this is not the most coercive of the coercive elements in the modern commonwealth. An even more rigid and ruthless external power is that of industrial employment and unemployment. An even more ferocious enemy of the family is the factory. Between these modern mechanical things, the ancient natural institution is not being reformed or modified or even cut down. It is being torn in pieces. It is not only being torn in pieces in the sense of a true metaphor, like a living thing caught in a hideous clockwork of manufacture. It is being literally torn in pieces in that the husband may go to one factory, the wife to another, and the child to a third. Each will become the servant of a separate financial group, which is more and more gaining the political power of a feudal group. But whereas feudalism received the loyalty of families, the lords of the new servile state will receive only the loyalty of individuals, that is, of lonely men and even of lost children. It is sometimes said that socialism attacks the family, which is founded on little beyond the accident that some socialists believe in free love. I have been a socialist, and I am no longer a socialist, and at no time did I believe in free love. It is true, I think, in a large and unconscious sense, that state socialism encourages the general coercive claim I have been considering. But if it be true that socialism attacks the family in theory, it is far more certain that capitalism attacks it in practice. It is a paradox, but a plain fact, that men never notice a thing as long as it exists in practice. Men who will note a heresy will ignore an abuse. Let anyone who doubts the paradox imagine the newspapers formally printing along with the honours list a price list for peerages and knighthoods, though everybody knows they are bought and sold. So the factory is destroying the family in fact, and need depend on no poor mad theorist who dreams of destroying it in fancy. And what is destroying it is nothing so plausible as free love, but something rather to be described as an enforced fear. It is an economic punishment, more terrible than legal punishment, which may yet land us in slavery as the only safety. From its first days in the forest, this human group had to fight against wild monsters, and so it is now fighting against these wild machines. It only managed to survive then, and it will only manage to survive now, by a strong internal sanctity, a tacit oath or dedication deeper than that of the city or the tribe. But though this silent promise was always present, it took, at a certain turning point of our history, a special form, which I shall try to sketch in the next chapter. The turning point was the creation of Christendom by the religion which created it. Nothing will destroy the sacred triangle, and even the Christian faith, the most amazing revolution that ever took place in the mind, served only, in a sense, to turn that triangle upside down. It held up a mystical mirror in which the order of the three things was reversed, and added a holy family of child, mother, and father to the human family of father, mother, and child. End of chapter 5.